Bethlehem and beyond, how Christianity's earliest holy sites were identified. We're talking about the sites in the Holy Land, of course. This is on The Conversation by Professor of Archaeology, University of Reading, Ken Dark. Every Christmas, Bethlehem becomes a focus of global attention as the scene of Christ's nativity, the birth of Christ, Jesus Christ. And most years, the town center is crowded with Christian pilgrims. Indeed, many people travel to the Holy Land throughout the year to visit places of religious importance, whether in Jerusalem, Nazareth, Bethlehem, or even around the Sea of Galilee. Kindly support my Patreon channel because YouTube has again demonetized my YouTube channel. You'll find at least 5 videos daily, even though there's a lot more because of YouTube restrictions on sensitive election material. I'm sure you'll find them interesting. They're totally different from what I have on YouTube. You'll find the link in the description box below each video. Thank you so much for your support. But when did Christians start to consider places as holy and begin traveling to them on pilgrimage? Following on from my archaeological work in Nazareth, I decided to investigate using both ancient written sources and archaeological evidence. According to the Gospels, Christ taught that there was no such thing as a holy place, but that the 3rd century prominent Christians such as Alexander, later Bishop of Jerusalem, and the renowned scholar Origen of Alexandria were seeking out locations mentioned in the Bible. Even earlier, in the mid-2nd century, the Christian writer Justin Martyr knew of a cave in Bethlehem said to be the location of the Nativity. The Gospel of James, sometimes called the Proto-Evangelium of James, which dates from the 2nd century AD, also mentions such a cave in Bethlehem. While these writers could be referring to different caves, they attest that Bethlehem had at least one Christian holy place within a generation or two of the composition of the Gospel of John, the last of the canonical Gospels. The cave being, that's where the stable was for the animals. Now, here in Europe, many a cave, because of the limestone mountains that we have, there's a lot of areas that are cave-like, and that's where they keep their animals. It's a nice shelter for them, a stable. Now, written sources show that other Christian holy places at a similar early date, a cave on the Mount of Olives, just outside the ancient city of Jerusalem, was assigned Christian significance in the apocryphal Acts of John, probably written in the late 2nd century. Inside Jerusalem itself, the 1st century tomb, later revered as a place of Christ's burial and of his resurrection, the Holy Sepulchre, may have already been identified as such in the 2nd century. The 4th century historian Eusebius says that Hadrian built a temple over the tomb in opposition to its Christian significance, and as Hadrian built temples at or near both the Jewish temple at Jerusalem and the most important Samaritan shrine at Mount Gerizim, this may be more than late Roman speculation. Eusebius' account is also consistent with archaeological evidence for a monumental Roman building on the Holy Sepulchre site later than the 1st century tomb and before the 4th century pilgrimage church there, the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. 7 other 4th century pilgrim churches were on sites with caves, at least partly cut out of the rock, rather than being holy natural caverns, as well as the Church of the Nativity at Bethlehem, where Jesus was born. These include churches at the Shepherd's Fields, a location just outside Bethlehem, where the angels were believed to have announced Christ's birth to the shepherds, the Eleona, the Olive Grove, the Church on the Mount of Olives, which is just across from Jerusalem, a site associated with the ascension of Jesus Christ when he returned to heaven, the Garden of Gethsemane, where Jesus was betrayed by Judas, that's where he would pray at nights, and Tagba by the Sea of Galilee, near that what was believed to be the site of the Sermon on the Mount, and also the miracle with the olives and the fish. There were also 2 at Nazareth, associated with the Annunciation to Mary by the Archangel Gabriel, and with Jesus' childhood home. All these 4th-century churches were either located in reference to or were actually within the caves, and these caves were therefore probably understood as marking the locations of the events associated with their sites in the 4th century. For example, at Bethlehem, the early 4th century church of the Nativity was specifically designed to display the cave as a primary physical focus of the church, and the altar was located in the cave itself. On archaeological grounds alone, the best interpretation of this layout is that the church and its altar were positioned because of the pre-existing religious importance of the cave. This interpretation of the caves in general is supported by written evidence. Eusebius wrote in his Life of Constantine that 3 great imperial churches were built in the early 4th century at places where crucial moments in the Gospels took place: the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, the Church of the Nativity, and the Olive Grove, the Eleona, the Mount of Olives, that is. All of these buildings, Eusebius says in his famous ecclesiastical history, were built over pre-existing caves, one actually a rock-cut tomb associated with the events commemorated by their 4th century churches. Now, the pilgrimage trail. If at least some of the caves at these 7 sites were constructed or modified to indicate places of Christian significance prior to the 4th century, they are among the earliest specifically Christian structures yet known. But nothing about them suggests that they were more than a few local people involved in their construction, and the very details of their size and plan suggest that they are products of separate initiatives. The use of the caves in this way may also imply that they were visited for religious reasons earlier than their 4th century churches. Perhaps the earliest form of Christian pilgrimage. If the events commemorated by them were the same as the dedications of their later churches, then they would form a narrative sequence from the Annunciation to the Resurrection, with each cave and the tomb at the Holy Sepulchre site associated with only one event. It's therefore possible that even before these sites were used for 4th century churches, Christians traveled between them in a sequence following the order of those events in the Gospel. This means written and archaeological evidence suggests that the origins of Christian topography and pilgrimage were earlier than usually supposed. If so, the 4th century Imperial Church builders inherited, rather than created, a network of holy places that had probably been emerging gradually over centuries as a consequence of small-scale local and perhaps low-status initiatives. And this is from The Conversation by Professor of Archaeology and History from the University of Reading, Ken Dark. And I wish you all a beautiful, blessed, healthy, prosperous Christmas and a very prosperous and healthy New Year. God bless you, and thank you for your support.